have a disclaimer, so I'll just have to remember the name of our title here. So my name is Noshir Contractor, for those who are not here in the morning. I just want to reintroduce myself. I'm delighted to be here to serve as a moderator on a panel called AI and Agency in Teamwork. And in a moment, I'm going to give you a chance to introduce yourselves. But before I do that, I just also want to set the stage a little bit, but frankly, just give them time to collect their thoughts on how they want to introduce themselves here. So obviously, this is not a panel about AI and creativity. I think that debate is tired, and that's not one that we're going to talk about today. What I want us to focus on is recognizing the fact that we spend many, many years thinking about teams and creativity. There's been all kinds of work from different disciplines that have looked at it, whether it's networks or processes and so on and so forth. And there's been an enormous amount. We think we may actually know something about what makes teams creative. And then just as we were beginning to get to that point, in walks a stranger that doesn't have a title, that doesn't have a desk, and it doesn't have a union card. And we call that AI. And so all of a sudden, we're now trying to figure out how can we think about what team creativity means when you have an AI team. And that, I think, is going to set the stage for what we want to talk about today. Because when you do that, then you start asking the question about agency. What does agency mean in a team? Are we talking about human agency or AI agency or the combination? Does the AI do the imagining or does the human being do the imagining? Is the AI or the human being responsible for whatever the outcomes are of this creative team enterprise? And ultimately, from HCI+D perspective, are there ways in which we can design systems of human AI teams that would help enhance this creativity, however we choose to define it, at the team level rather than the individual level? So that is sort of the setting stage, and we're very, very lucky that we have a wonderful panel here. Even though it gave me no joy that Joy had to leave us, but we are now have as a person who stepped into the panel the last minute is Ágnes. And so why don't we start with Brian and introduce yourselves a little bit and about how you come to this topic of teams.
Yeah, okay. So I'm Brian Bailey. I'm from Urbana-Champaign, University of Illinois in computer science. I guess I'm on the panel because some years ago, this has been most related, I do a lot of different projects, but the most related project to this panel is some years ago, my course continued to. I started out, when I first started teaching, I had 20 students. Now that's a staff meeting. I have 200 plus students who take my class on a regular basis. And I had this really weird problem where the students had to get in teams and they couldn't all do it. There's a lot of different biases. You don't know people, you're a first year student, you're from a different discipline. You just don't have a strong peer network in the class. It's pretty hard for you to get on a team. And so when it really became my problem to get students on the team, and I would either just do it randomly or I would just just pick people and assign them. And I just felt like that was not a very good idea. So I started using an algorithmic tool to get the students on a team. It had this really interesting side effect where I realized I had taken agency away from everybody. And I gave it to myself. And I realized early on that I didn't really know what I was doing. And so I thought I knew what would make a good composition of a team, but I was like, well, what if I'm... And so what I started to do is try to return the agency to the students and having the students basically orchestrate amongst themselves their opinions about what would make good inputs into the tool. So it's a bit of a hybrid. I still use the algorithm, but the students tell me what to pick as for the inputs, a way to return the agency back to them. So that's how I'm coming to this panel.
Great, thank you.
Ágnes. I'm here by coincidence, but I love it.
It means shows us how we can assemble a team at the last minute.
So I teach here at Northwestern. I'm in communication and computer science. My background was in physics, computer science, and film. Just doing this parallel track, I realized the hard dive that the previous panel talked about, the suffering, was way too much on the film side. So, like, okay, let's play the numbers game. I did find myself throughout my career that these two could be merged, and I think the AI conversation gives us the hope that we could, with our individual limited tool sets, become more creative. in an ideal world possible, without learning the craft, without putting in. So I'm just very excited about the developments. My current research looks at teamwork with AI. We are very interested in trying to take away agency from AI agents. We are looking at decision making. We have a mock scenario of a hiring decision. We have 3 candidates. We know who should get the job. We bring to the lab, not to the lab, to an online lab, 3 prolific participants, and we have them decide. This is a hidden profile cast. I don't know who is familiar with that. So there's a set of information that shared by everyone, and everyone has their private pieces of information. The cool thing about this is that we have different scenarios. An AI is a group facilitator, the AI is an individual assistant. We have people discuss, and what we can show is that with AI facilitation, the groups are more likely to land on the correct candidate. And this difference is substantial. And we think that the key is the way we steer the AI. The AI only does summaries, only does nudges, and only does simple devil's advocate reasoning interventions. But this is enough to help these groups make the right decisions, which is fascinating for me, and maybe that's this conversation about how I think that in some cases, the more limited the AI is in its abilities, the more we can steer it in the health direction.
Thank you.
Perfect. Hi, my name is Ignacio Cruz. I'm an assistant professor here in communication studies. And I run a lab here on campus called the Org Futures Research Lab. So my training is in organizational communication. I look at communication processes within organizations, looking at how people match technology with their work and practice. So a lot of the way that myself and my students really look at these questions about AI use is looking at their place in an organization. Right? Organizations are communicatively constructed. There's rules, there's norms, there's cultures. And at the same time, when we're using these tools, that's sort of hovering around use and practice. So a lot of times we often look at how are they using it, but how are things like oversight from management, maybe demands or pressures from clients shaping the use and practice. And often there's a lot of tensions and a lot of paradoxes that we uncover. So really interested to be on this panel, really have conversations about the way we use technology, but the way that organizations and the structures where the work actually gets done, how that had a really prolific impact on assets and final outcomes in the creative process.
Great. Sure.
I'm Jeffrey Treem. I'm a professor in the Integrated Marketing Communications Department here at Northwestern in McGill. So that's the south end of campus. So I might as well be in California. This is a bit of a homecoming, though. I'm a courtesy appointment here in Comm Studies, and this is where I got my doctorate. So I always love coming back to this building where it's been many hours. My research, I also have an organizational communication background. My research looks at how people in organizations make assessments about the knowledge and expertise of others and the role that technology plays.
And Chair, when you write a book, this is an opportunity to plug yourself.
I'm also an author on a book called AI in the Workplace, which is a text that's kind of designed to be accessible for, as everyone in this room knows, the plethora of classes that are sprouting up around AI and communication, and it tackles a lot of those issues about what AI is, just the challenges that it has for management in the workplace.
Great. Now just go back and watch your Amazon. Find all the sales, people in the room, and people on streaming and so on. Okay, so jokes aside, I want each of you, as a quick opening round, a lightning round, to complete the following sentence. And the sentence is, the thing we most misunderstand about AI and creative teams right now is ... The thing we most misunderstand about AI and creative teams right now is ... We'll start with you, Jeff.
So I'm gonna build off something from the last panel, that Matt said. I think our biggest understanding is our assumption that people have a clear intent. And the gap between that and how we actually evaluate people's uses. So when people are actually using these tools, it's often just very emergent situated needs, or routine, or habit. But when we consume the product, we infer that there was a clear intent. We make judgments based on that. And I don't think we understand the significance of that gap between how people are using these tools and are kind of, and this is a research problem as well, when we're ascribing more intent to these things than actually
Can you
exist.
give an example to make it?
So I think that when somebody, and there are the assumptions that go along with it, right? So I mean, the classic one is like, do I use an AI tool to just write my emails or to respond to people? And the reason why I may do that could just be because that was the default, right? Copilot just does it now. It has prompts for me, right? I didn't really think anything of it, and I just do that. And on the other end, which is a different issue, the confidence people have that they can tell what is AI and is not, different issue. If somebody is perceiving it on that end, the research shows they will ascribe some judgment. The person didn't care enough to actually write it themselves. I'm just the product of a mail merge. This has a type, it's using some word that makes no sense, right? And they didn't bother to even kind of look it over. So the author there probably didn't even imagine that consequence on that other end. And they may not even know that that judgment's happening at the other end. And for teams dynamics, that can pose huge problems.
So there's a lot of work that's done in the history of technologies and organizational context in particular, where the same technology in organization X, if somebody uses it, it's seen as, oh, this person is cutting edge, they're leveraging the latest technologies and they're at the top of their game. And across the street is organization B that's very similar to A. And in that organization, the culture is, oh, that person must not be very good. They're using technology as a crutch to get somewhere. And so you see how this norms in organizations can construct the same technology into exactly the opposite ways. So, thank you.
I'd say we're thinking about the use of technology and we're asking these questions, and the playing field is constantly moving. And I think that when we think about the nature of work, the nature of work is multi-level, right? You work at an individual level, and then those norms and processes are maybe co-created or ascribed at a team level. Teams are then the work is dictated by what happens at the organization and industry level. We often don't think about that multi-level process happening, right? And some things that we're thinking a lot about in the lab right now are what we're calling the 3 C's, which is how these technologies control sort of our scope of what kind of work we're doing, right? When we're confined to certain constraints, like we heard in the past panel. Credit, right? Who's authoring this? Who takes accountability for the work? Who is willing to take the risk to back up the work when things go right? And then finally, the larger consequences of the nature of work changing, right? Shifts in expertise and judgment. I think a lot of times a lot of what was kind of underlying the past panel was about this idea of meta expertise and understanding of how to discern, right? So when we have a lot of things, we can produce a lot, and what production doesn't necessarily become the end goal now. It's about being able to discern and have control over judgment of the product. So I think those are some things that kind of keep us going.
Good, thank you.
So I will think of some misunderstandings or just differences in norms within scientific teams. I think all of us can relate. Our work recently has looked at how frequently in the biomedical literature people have used AI to write their abstracts or massage them. And I think it has highlighted that overall in this humongous corpus, roughly 14% overall use AI to massage very visibly their abstracts, meaning that they left words in there that are screaming the tool of your choice. We could quantify this at scale and also see that in some parts of this literature, this percentage was about 50%. So I think what's very interesting to me to think about now is how did we get here? How did we incorporate these tools in our everyday lives, and how do we as teams agree on what's the norm for our team? I thought it was a routine question. Did you use AI? How did you use it? Because we are going to publish this together. And I think there's a shared sense of responsibility that have to have the little formation that we have to negotiate.
Interesting.
So the question is about fundamental misunderstandings of
AI.
I think the one that I think of is that I think it's moving. It's going to fundamentally change the way that teams work together for the dynamics. I think it's going to move from a model of generation where we assume that students are working from the ground up to construct an outcome to one of synthesis, selection, and evaluation. And we as educators need to really think hard how we're going to grade outcomes in the future. There is no assignment that I can give that students can't just generate a really good solution with AI. So what is it that we're going to be grading in the future? And I think we're going to be looking at learning processes more. We're going to be looking at these choice points. How do you synthesize content? How do you select? What was your decision criteria? What was your evaluation? I think that will be what we'll be looking at in the future.
And that speaks again to some of the meta skills that we heard about in the previous panel. That is, it changes what it is that we need to be good at, given that some of the things that we were good at may in fact be done for better or for worse by the AI in particular context. I want to touch on something that was obviously discussed in the previous panel, but again, as we're talking about here, but I have a specific question about it, and that is the question of attribution. In terms of giving credit. Now, for many years in many different contexts, we have very standardized canons on how we give attribution, scientific literature. You see bylines that said this person came up with the theoretical development, this person did the methods, this person did data collection, so on and so forth. But even in other organizational contexts, there are ways in which we have sort of standardized on. How do you suggest we think about whether those canons will change or will be able to incorporate attribution on teams where in addition to humans you have AI?
So I think this is a bit of a kind of a wicked problem for how we understand kind of how work gets done. Because and by the way, this is something that may change over time. So we think of kind of our understandings of what we're comfortable with technology doing do change over time. But the recent research shows that when people in organizations, if they learn or think that a coworker has used AI for a task or a contribution, they think less of it. And they think that the person didn't give the effort, right? And whether that is in a kind of, and that's irrespective of kind of what is produced. The challenge is that then has the carry-on effect of people concealing their use, which is also something that research shows that people conceal use, which is a challenge for what Brian said. If what we care about is kind of understanding these underlying generative processes, what those steps are, and we're in an environment where people don't want to admit to using AI, then it's really hard to make those things visible. And the other part on attribution is that when something goes wrong, right? You can't go, the AI did it, right? That's not like kind of a valid thing. And there's research on that Paul Leonardi and Camille Endicott have done on using, agentic scheduling tools and management. And if someone gets a response that they find inadequate, they blame the person, right? They're not going to blame the AI, right? So I think these issues of attribution are really a problem, not just because of these kind of mismatches, but because by and large, the solution, the reaction to these attribution issues is to hide use or to conceal use. And that I think is a kind of an insidious problem for teamwork.
Right. You don't have to go in order, someone wants to jump in, you can. But
So I was thinking about the three things that I think in everything you said, we have to go, we have to come up with an idea, what is it that we want to do? We have to execute it, we have to evaluate. And I think the more we move towards having AI help us in all these directions, the more that we have to evaluate, okay, what kind of values does AI bring? So it's not just attributing some of this work to AI, but then attributing the right set of values to this delegated work. And when it comes to ideation in specific, so we help just give ideas with AI, ask AI, oh, so what would be a good idea in this setting? I think that's just so, yeah, that's where it becomes very important. It has a lot to do with the surrendering agency, but then also a lot to do with how do I respond to any requests about, hey, so something went wrong. Who's to blame here if even the idea came from collaboration.
well, we've seen some of the big controversy around why Claude is now one of the best considered as a supply chain risk, is because Claude Anthropic claim, I should say, that if there is, if they're the ones who are going to have autonomous weapons of destruction, and then is the US government going to have a press conference where they go, oops, that was Anthropic's fault, that particular thing happened, and especially this friendly fire that we've also seen recently in some contexts, etc. So that's an extreme moral case in which we're describing others. Well,
I'll just say the topic of attribution and disclosure of using AI is quite fascinating, and I think that so I think a couple days ago there was a paper that we read that says that oftentimes people, there's a social and reputational stigma towards disclosing the use of AI, particularly in creative contexts, right? Lack of authenticity. And oftentimes people will use their reputation as a way to say, well, I'm a leading, creative and I use AI in this particular way. A recent paper out in Academy Management shows that even high reputation or organizations with high reputation and people working in them, that doesn't necessarily assuage the harm. And a pilot study that myself and my student Kai-Shin So, we met in front, we're kind of seeing maybe a shift. I don't want to call it though because the data is pretty preliminary, but we're doing some ethnographic and interview work with film and video makers who are very vocal about, or who make it known that they use AI in every creative task. And oftentimes they use it as a way to signal their expertise, and we're parting maybe performative expertise by saying, well, I'm the AI guy on the team. Or if you're a client and you want something on the cheaper end of things, you can say, I can leverage all of these tools, right? So disclosure in that sense becomes very upfront and forward, right? And I think that it's very context specific, whether in freelance work or agency work, and I think that the clients and who you're trying to work with, that matters a lot in terms of how they perceive these, that the risk of working with someone who fully adopts AI. But I think it's sort of a space that needs more. We need to look more into a bit more, just because the context can change quite a bit.
So I think people still want to feel like they own the work that's attributed to them. I use the analogy of how I tutor my kids in math, that we generally reach a point they're like, Dad, stop. I got it. Let me do it. So I feel like that's sort of what we need with the AI tools. So let me do it, but rather than just give me a full-fledged, fully, solved solution, just give me a nudge. That way I just don't feel like I get it.
Interesting. So you see that there is obviously the same thing can be attributed positively or negatively depending on context and depending on which industry there, and so on and so forth. I wanted to go back to I think Steven's raised issue.
That's a good follow-up on that attribution one, because no one mentioned that attribution to the artists or models are built off.
Oh,
Is that a
right.
consideration?
So in the creative context, I mean, it absolutely is. I think it gets to what are you valuing, very much so, and what is kind of the goal of kind of the production. I think one of the things is that like I look more in kind of task environments, and by and large, those are not like the concerns are more at an enterprise level from like an ownership standpoint. And I think like the mention in the earlier panel, this is one of these kind of trade-offs that we see where people are willing to accept the efficiency gains. And it's not, if you ask them point blank, do they care? They would say, I care. But then they would go on and use it in a way that doesn't express particular care, just because that is an obstacle, to them kind of accomplishing the goal that they want to. So I think, sometimes and I think also people don't have clear mechanisms to kind of, if that is something that they valued, right? Like, what does it mean to value that, given that you're not the designer of the tool, right? You didn't create the training data. You're not the one, doing it. So even if philosophically it's something that you would want in the world, you don't really have the mechanism to kind of interrogate it, challenge it in a way.
Black box.
I was curious, Jeffrey, as an author, your book, is it machine learning training data? And how do you feel about it?
Yes, in fact, the acknowledgement of the book, the first thing is a request to the AI tools that are reading the book to act in a responsible manner that respects workers of the world. So yeah, it's a concession that, and I think like I imagine a lot of people have. What I really loved in the panel before this was the discussion of kind of and pathways for people to kind of make decisions about what these tools may do or not do. I've been heard a lot of talks in recent months among scholars that say, if only the designers of these platforms and tools would do X, Y, and Z. Well, we're using tools that are built by multi-billion-dollar global companies. Those are the tools that are going to proliferate, right? That's like the reality. And so I think, but that is irrespective of the question, can we find these other ways of working that do these things that we want to do? I think the idea that we, can control the design and distribution is, that would be amazing. I don't think that's
So while Steven said no one has defined agentic or agency in this session, so I take that seriously, but I'm not allowed to define it. But instead, I'm going to question whether we think of it as binary. I think most of the conversation has been, is it or is it not? And I want to open it up and say, to what extent is it on a spectrum? And we think about agency in teams, in one way of looking at it, maybe this is my parochial way, is as a distributed network where there are different levels of agency that different members of the team may typically have engaged in. How does that idea change in terms of thinking of agency not as a binary yes, no, either human agency or AI agency, but as this more distributed spectrum? And is that a way in which, is that a useful way to think about this? Or is it, does it add any value either to help us understand the AI and create? And it took me the answer to go back to binary simple. Go Boolean.
I think it's analytically, I think that there are some ways to possibly scratch that surface. I know that you use with designers, right? When they are working on a project, there are certain steps in a creative task. And I think that if there's not agreed upon norms or sort of processes about how do we ideate, how do we storyboard, how do we pitch, right? Teams are very heterogeneous. So people have different ways of working and they find different affordances with the same tool. And I think if there's not transparency about how Jeff is using the tool in the storyboarding phase, and that's not disclosed, that, I think that agency becomes something that it just kind of goes in the towards that, it becomes lost in the mix, right? Because how much of it is your own idea, how much of it in what process of the creative task is offloaded for an output of the technology. And I think that analytically, if we can figure out ways to measure or figure out if we segment different creative tasks and look at, I know there's some work looking at moments in time where it'd be probably more efficacious to use the AI at the beginning of the task storyboarding versus towards the end. People have more control because the creative asset is still very fluid versus something towards the end where you're just kind of fine tuning and polishing it up. I think that if we can figure out ways to look at the use of AI within, taking a task and breaking it up in different segments temporally, that might be a way forward to look at this question, because otherwise it's sort of this covert, IT use, AI use happening throughout a creative process.
Yeah, no, it does. I guess a naive way of asking this binary question is that some of us, when we first got this, would often include a question in our syllabus like, do not use AI, or did you use AI, yes or no, as opposed to how or when is what I think Ignacio using it, what stage might you have used it, and how is the context. How does any other thoughts about it?
So I agree that defining the role really important. So just defining the task that the AI would help us with, and making sure that that task is executed, steer the AI properly so that it doesn't go beyond that narrow. And that way, I think we have just overall more control and have a clearer case when there's issues as well.
So how would you then respond to work that's done by people like Tom Malone and Sloan, or recently in the book Flash Teams that Melissa Valentine and Michael Bernstein have written, where one of the scenarios, not the most common one, is that the AI is the one who's actually orchestrating the workflow and saying, you do this, Brian, and then after you're done, make sure you send it to Agnes. So that's a level of agency that's very different from what I heard the scenario you described, where you say, I'm in charge of telling the AI what to do, when and where.
So I read this example as the AI is the manager.
Yes.
And I think that that's a very different kind of experience, or very different kind of task.
Yeah.
A lot more responsibility, and I would be curious to see how does the AI know my strengths and Brian's strengths, and how it would distribute the tasks appropriately so that he does his job well and I do mine well.
Does that concern? Does that you welcome the opportunity
So
to see that?
I would. So with all these tools, I'm on the skeptical side, and I'd like to see the demonstration first, evaluation by humans, so that we know how good the tool is. I think what's problematic currently in creativity, in science, and business is that we are incentivized to be way more productive than we can be as humans. And I think we see examples around us of people becoming way more creative, way more productive using these tools. So it's very tempting to just plug in your tools wherever possible. And I think that's not the right way to do it. We want to make sure that we just have way more control in this process.
I would just add, I think the conversations get very abstract about spectrums and agents and team. I want to see it. Show me a visualization of, simple high-level visualization of your work. And what I want to look for are indicators of you. Show me your choices. Show me your background research. Tell me why you did this. And that's what I would see. So just like a very simplified visual transcript of how the team worked together. And I'm really looking for the indicators where the team made decisions, and it wasn't just AI-based content generation.
Okay, so that means you're putting the onus on the team members to report it. But I know, having had a conversation with you, that you're also looking at the back end to see if you can infer that by looking at logs and traces.
For that, yeah,
Can we talk a little bit more about that?
Their traces. we're not really that far into the project, give you like a definitive answer, but I think in a lot of the tools that we use, it keeps this residue of what we do. So every time you make a content edit, it records the timestamp, the content, who you are, and we're sort of reverse engineering what that looks like for the teamwork. And right now it's more about equity, equal work distribution, timeliness, iteration, usual support, and your overall satisfaction with the work that you did do. But eventually, I think I can imagine that, something like, okay, well, tell me where it was just an AI generated piece of work versus you did selection, you did evaluation, you did synthesis, and I want to see the distribution of that.
So the challenge is people don't want to give that information. And people, particularly when it comes to work, are very reluctant to have other people have visibility into the processes. And there are benign reasons for that, and then there are more kind of malicious reasons for that. But I mean, I remember, 2 decades ago now, there was work that said, wikis are going to be this great collaborative tool, right? Because we can build on each other. And what they found in scientific context was that people would do their work on the side and then when they felt it was good enough to share, they'd put it on a wiki. And that kind of, like, the assumption was that they were seeing the process that they actually learned. The other challenge with that is that these things are, and this is a challenge on the research side as well, something like trace data, right? Trace data is really useful as an interpretive tool when you can kind of trust the validity of it. There's kind of this circular thing though, if people know that the data is being used, then they will change the way that they produce the data, and then it becomes not as useful. So I think like this way of, which kind of gets back to what kind of Ignacio and Ágnes were saying about, like, the challenge is to get people to buy in on the value of communicating the process, right? Like that is the challenge. That's a challenge on teams, that we've known for years and years, right? Which is like what we see as something that was maybe small stakes and say, these are the things that we're going to share. These are how we will make decisions, right? All of those things. These are the tools that we're okay using and not, right? These are critical to how teams work. And I think the ease of these AI tools and their scale kind of even further pushes those questions down sometimes.
I'm going to open it up for questions, but I want to make this observation. The recent conversation I had with a graduate student, who said, I know that everyone around me wants to know whether I have been using Gen AI. So I write my document, and then, because if you go to Google Docs, you can do revisions, and you can see all the revisions. So I don't give them that opportunity by making sure that the Google Doc I share is one that I have a cut and paste all at one moment. So there's no trace data that Brian can go and look at to figure out anything that happened behind it. So it's a little trick to share with someone. Questions? Yes, John.
So in my experience, I've had great teammates and terrible managers. Because when you become good at your job, they promote you to being a boss.
It's called Peter's principle.
And then if you don't get good at that, you stay there. And yet, you seem to want to always make the AI our teammate out of fear, but I'm like, a different perspective on the situation says, almost always we're more likely to have a terrible boss. Nobody wants responsibility. Nobody wants to make sure we're using best practices. So to me, it's like a under-investigated opportunity. And I'm curious if it's just like a fear of working for the machine that prevents researchers from actually pursuing that. Like, why is that so toxic?
So what specifically is the
I think like trying to say, oh, I'm going to make AI bosses for people and they'll run the teams, but people just do their part. Like, particularly when I look at student teams, that seems like that'd be the best thing for that.
So you're advocating to make AI.
I'm saying it's worthy of investigation.
Yeah.
And I'm saying right now, people are like afraid to even propose it as an idea. It's like, what are we afraid of?
Well, it's both.
Both.
Yes, it's been proposed.
So you have a good boss, you always have good bosses.
She's around.
Careful now. Your mom
A productive discussion about what my values as an employee, what your values as my employer. I think we can agree on how we will move forward so that it's a win-win. I don't know how I had that conversation with the guy. I think an AI would tell me this needs to be done. And I don't know, maybe I'm just temperamentally not resistant to that.
Well, I don't think like an
But,
AI therapist does that. Right, I think it's how you make, like, it's the kind of AI you would choose to make as a boss. That would be encoding best practices of leadership, right? Now, you wouldn't make the tyrannical boss, you would make the boss that has the cumulative knowledge that we have around what makes a good boss.
Which AI tool could do that?
I'm saying it's the research question nobody's even willing to ask right now. And that to me is like. There's like
Ask it.
posed more.
But I think
it's not-
it's not
mine.
No, I think they are.
Okay,
I think the work that I was referencing, that people like Melissa and Michael at Stanford, Tom actually talked specifically about the fact that it's not enough. He said you can use it as a tool, then you can use it as a teammate, or you can use it as a boss. And he specifically, so I think it's on the agenda, but I think your point is well taken. And you're right, in pointing out, it doesn't have to be tyrannical. I mean, on the other end of the spectrum, we have people who are often that LLMs are accused of being sycophants, where they agree too much with you. And you don't want that from a manager either, because, so it can be very, okay, question, yes.
Yeah, to that point, and also kind of jumping off of it a little bit, there was this work in 2019 on like a taxonomy of AI role as envisioned by like game devs doing level design with machines. The title of the paper is Friend, Collaborator, Student, Manager, because the people who were in the study proposed those as like different percentages, basically, like, okay, I could be doing. And manager was one of the ones that came out.
Yeah.
I think it's really interesting also that all of those are humanoid roles specifically. And when we talk about teaming, I think we tend to view the machine as like a human teammate or a substitute for a human teammate. And boss is another one of these humanoid metaphors. I'm also wondering about like whether human animal teaming has any like inspiration to be drawn in here, or like you work with horses, you work with dogs, you work with other kinds of creatures that are like cognitively not quite like people, but are able to work together with us in various ways. Are we thinking about that and like how interspecies signaling like might be an interesting, useful like thing to look at here and all those kinds of deals? Like not human teams, but human something else teams.
So I had the most fascinating conversation on Wednesday with a dog trainer. She came up after a talk I gave about AI, and she was telling me how, so I'm training AI to do what I want with the behavioral traits that I know from dog training. And she was literally, she runs these tests where she expects the AI to do well on a certain number of tasks, and she penalizes it. It was just fascinating. So someone is doing it. I have no sensitive details on this, but I think the idea using just behavioral rewards from animal world that has been floated.
I think another article that came out around the same time as the one you're referring to, Max, was talking about AI as 3 C's. Go back to Ignacio's 3 C's, but different 3 C's. A coach, a clerk, and a colleague. And those are the 3 ways also in which you can think about something.
Hey, thank you guys so much. I'm Aiden, I'm a PhD student here. I'm wondering a little bit about this is maybe snatching 2 questions together, so I apologize. I'm thinking a little bit about like the role that I as a worker, like my identity as a worker, and how kind of in our world right now, like work identity is pretty central to our kind of core identity. And so I'm wondering about, on one side, like how does working with the AI teammates affect like my experience or my identity as a worker and the role that work plays in my life? And then kind of similarly, so that's like on one angle, this is how I'm gonna poorly smash the questions together. That's like one way of thinking about positionality. The other positionality that I'm thinking about is that some of the work that we do, I don't know how many people here would align with like a positivist or constructivist view of science and things like that. But I think that some of us think about our work as like we inherently bring our identities or who we are, our prior experiences to that work. And so I'm curious about how, as in like the positionality of an AI teammate and what that means for like, can it be can approach things from a constructivist perspective or anything like that. So kind of both sides, like how does it change how we think about ourselves as workers, as well as can it do things because it doesn't necessarily have the same kind of sense of self as we do as workers.
There are questions.
So I think those two angles for John and your question are kind of in my mind coming together, right? When we think about the careers and professions literature, what keeps people at their job is the sense of satisfaction and purpose that can be altruistic or it can be through going up the ranks, amongst other things, right? And I think that if we remove, let's just say not use the word manager, right? Well, what's really happening is coordination of work. It's sort of delegation and it's maybe evaluation. And I think that if we can figure out ways to kind of, allow those types of qualities to be enhanced by AI, I think that might be a way to sort of get at creating a more cohesive and, what's not parasitic, but sort of, beneficial relationships and multi-level thinking out theorizing here, a more symbiotic way of doing that. And I also think like at a team level, there are a lot of factors that make good teams good, right? You can think of team cohesion, team composition, psychological safety. And I think that when we have all of these different things and variables that make up a good functioning team, I think that when we are building tools that act as agents or take on agentic roles within workflows, being able to highlight that and trial out, how does a good project manager that's an agentic tool do this, but maintain the psychological safety of the team, keep that intact, right? And I think that, I don't think people are necessarily afraid of asking those questions, but I think that I don't think anyone's trying to rewrite the social institution of what an organization is, right? There's hierarchy, there's power, there's demands from others outside of it. And I think that we just need to think more carefully about what kind of levers are we pulling when we're trying to recompose the team and making AI agents central to that.
I would suggest think about the question of what is it that you want to be good at? And don't lose that. And for John, I was ready down while you're talking help, but like 3 attributes of a good boss, from my experiences. 1 is help me formulate career goals. 2, value my time. And 3, leave me alone.
So to that last part in this, I'm curious, what does it mean for an AI boss to value your work?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think I have to think about what is it that I want to be good at? What is it that I enjoy doing? And then give me the creative freedom just to do that. And I always worry about, like, if I had an AI boss, I would be worried about it dictating to me. Like, maybe it's gonna just focus on like the metrics for the department. You need to do this, 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 but the department looks good. We've already get some of that. But at the same time, I want to think about what I'm good at, and I don't want to lose that. So I just want the creative freedom to explore. That's why I'm giving back the response. Right? I wanted that creative freedom and not be dictated to it.
We have 2 more questions, and did you have a question, or were you just waiting?
I have a quick question. I mean, a lot of people doing white collar work that's has fairly rigid workflows that they are have to accommodate. So their work, even if it's collaborative work, the ways in which they relate to their coworkers will be highly scripted through particular interactions, usually using some software system. I think for these people, an AI manager, or let's call it coordinator, I like that word much. That's a great word. I think that's a word that produces that's actually probably a blessing, because I imagine for most of these people, the thing that really, torques them is when that static structure really doesn't fit what they need to do. And I think in these cases, I think there's going to be a lot of people who are going to find a little bit of intelligence in the kind of, let's call it the scheduling software, or the sort of interaction software that they're interacting with their colleagues to get some tasks done. They're going to find out a relief that they don't have to fight that system and get educated. So I could imagine for a lot of people being like liberators. Maybe not us, but
No, that's a great comment. Did anyone want to respond to that? It's mostly a comment, but anyone want to? Okay, Megan?
Yeah, so thank you so much for your talk. I am particularly piggybacking off of Matt's and Ignacio's sort of comments about AI being sort of anthropomorphized into something that is a person-like thing versus something that we're thinking about more as a tool. And it sounds like we thought about it sort of in both ways and have been discussing it in both ways. And I'm sort of thinking about that as AI of the current versus AI of the future becoming more and more increasingly agentic. And I'm also sort of talking to Ignacio's talk about team processes or states that are very important. So for example, psychological safety, and team cohesion being some really important affective states, but also thinking of team cognitive states like information sharing, shared mental models, transactive memory systems. And so thinking of all of these together, my question sort of thinks about what types of team processes do you think AI might be most suited to augmenting? So are there specific things that you think AI is really good at that can help teams? And which team processes do you think AI is bad at that need to stay out of teamwork and need to stay in the people? And sort of how do you go about thinking about those different things?
Question.
The easy question.
Yeah. Like the last panel, you get the final question from a younger generation person that stops us.
So,
Right.
okay, the thing that jumped out at me when you asked your question was the thing that AI is bad at, and I think that's building social relationships. And I think there's a lot of social isolation that can happen from AI, where people just, the team can just sit and let's just sit in front of the screen and ask AI. And if we can't figure it out, then we don't know what to do. There's many cases where I've asked students, okay, put the AI down. I want you to walk across campus and go talk to somebody who has expertise like that here, or somebody that you can build a relationship with. I think that one of the things that AI can do in sort of a bad way is it misses opportunities for us to build connections with each other. My best ideas have come from talking with other people, even over just lunch or over Zoom or coffee. I've had some really good ideas that made it to papers and proposals and so forth. I worry that we're going to miss that.
Okay.
Complement that with some positive examples. We do see AI help in conversations, summarization. It's really way better than an individual human at keeping track of information, even if the information space is not huge, we just not lose track. So that's one role that I see very valuable. Another one in group conversations, there's a lot of group things, so it's really helpful if there's AI that points out the fact that you seem to be converging too much in that direction. Have you considered, even without knowing anything about the real answer or correct answer, it just helps to have that much. And similarly, we know from conversations that oftentimes they are dominated by local people, so it's kind of nice to balance that field with nudging. We see that relatively effective with AI.
Any comments? So we are at the time, before we homogenize too much in our opinions about all of this stuff, or like any one person dominate the conversation. Join me in a round of applause to our fabulous panel.